if you're managing nutrition, if you're managing work-life balance, if you're really sitting with this conscious moment and not the one in the past and not the one in the future, and getting really clear about I'm here right now, you'll be a better friend and a better colleague and a better employee and a better boss. And so all those relationships will start to feel better.
Welcome to Empowering Leadership, a podcast from Dorrier Underwood. Join us as we explore new perspectives on leadership and discover what it takes to be effective as a leader. Here's your host, Doug McVadon.
What's the connection between looking at art in a museum and solving business problems? You'll find out in the next episode of Empowering Leadership with Amy Hofland, Senior Director of the Crow Museum of Asian Art at the University of Texas at Dallas. We'll also find out how to address the current culture of burnout that's sweeping across the globe. I'm really delighted to introduce you to my guest today on the Empowering Leadership podcast, Amy Hofland. Hello, Amy. It's good to see you.
Hello. It's so nice to be with you.
Now, we have a lot of things we can talk about because you've been the leader of several organizations and you've been a client of Dorrier Underwood's, which of course is my firm. And, you have been through some very interesting situations, but I want to tell you that where you've landed, which is separate from your organizational work, is as somewhat of an expert or a practitioner, at least, of mindfulness. Is that right?
That's right. Truly, mindfulness has been a journey along the way I was not expecting.
Yeah, so we could go into mindfulness as well as organizational life, and really we are going to go into both of them because, on the Empowering Leadership podcast, our purpose is to explore this leadership journey that we're all on and looking at empowering leadership in at least two directions. That is, what does it take to empower one's own leadership? How do you be empowered as a leader? And then how do you empower the leadership, like the people who are leading you in an organization? But I want to say I'm so excited. I'm feeling a little bit overly chatty, like I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but here I am just talking away. And I think maybe the mindfulness part should come into play here. You think you could do something to calm me down?
I think we should roll right into it. What a great way to start a conversation.
All right. Okay.
So, and to the audience out there, you can try this with us as well. And I just invite you in the place where you are, if you're seated, just to take one hand and place it on the table in front of you.
Okay.
And just sort of invite the silence in. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. And go ahead and take the second hand and place it over the first hand. And just take a deep breath. You might notice the energy of your body, the energy of your mind. And then bring your sense of awareness to the connection point of one hand to the other. Perhaps it's warmth you feel or sensations of gentle pressure. And then just take a couple of more deep breaths and open your eyes when you're ready. And this is called a grounding practice. So you mentioned you were kind of excited and hyper, and your mind is here and there, and bringing the hands together just helps us know I'm connected. I'm connected to myself. I'm connected to this moment with you, Doug, and I'm here and ready. So,
and this kind of idea that we should take a moment, I'll just say it that way, is, sweeping the nation, sweeping the world, right? And so you've obviously incorporated into your working life, yes?
I have. And, I was introduced to Thich Nhat Hanh, who is such a voice and has recently passed away, a voice to the West for mindfulness. I attended with my executive coach from Dorrier Underwood. I've been working with you all since 2014. And he said something so important that I've really taken into everything I do. He said that families in America are starving for silence, for togetherness. They're missing understanding and awareness. And so I think as a leader of an organization here in Dallas, this is my call, like this is my charge to figure out what is my role in that missing equation? How can I create some of that goodness of silence and awareness and togetherness through the tools at my fingertips?
And so let's talk a little bit about Thich Nhat Hanh and about his influence and the influence of Asia on America. Right. The place that we came together was when you were running the Crow Collection. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about that and how it intersects with what you just said about Thich Nhat Hanh?
So, and mindfulness fits well with my role, and because it is a museum of Asian art, we're in our 24th year. And I've been there since the opening day. And it's a family that decided to give their Asian art collection to the public. And I was part of that transition of taking these objects from the home, which were very precious and personal, into the public trust. And in 2014, which would have been about 16 years after we opened, the senior matriarch passed away. And that was a real turning point for the organization, because what Margaret said is what we did. You know, she was a lovely, strong Southern woman who had a vision for the museum as a space of interconnection and cultural fluency. And after she was gone, we had to find a new rock, like a new fulcrum of sustainability. And I'll never forget it. It was the summer of 2014, and both her son and I were really trying to figure out what is the strategic vision, what is the future. And I sat on a bus at a conference with another client of Doria Underwood, Allison Perkins. She leaned over to me and she said, "You know what you need, Amy? You need an executive coach. You need someone who can just help you clear the confusion and the uncertainty and the fear in this situation and help you see a path." And sure enough, just a couple of months later, I was engaged as a consultant with Doria Underwood, and it has really shifted my whole professional outlook to have that sounding board, to have someone really for me as a leader.
And so we should give a shout out to Allison Perkins, who is the outstanding and visionary leader of the Ranolda House Museum of American Art up in Winston-Salem, one of really the nation's outstanding institutions of its kind.
Yes, and she has been an important mentor to me as another leader who's worked for a private family, taking a museum into the public realm. So yes, Allison, and it's all about asking the right question at the right time, and sitting, making that connection was really important for the future of our museum, because I would have never imagined where we were headed.
Well, and, I think that the thing you were talking about at the time was how to deal with the dilemmas you faced as a leader, both having to lead people and having to answer to a boss or a board that was very demanding and difficult for you at that time. And so why don't you talk about what that was like, just your situation, before you talk about how you resolved it?
Sure. The leader of the museum and the family was from a corporate background. And it was boots on the ground, sales. And it was demanding. It was 24/7. But what was missing was that North Star, that mutual shared mission of where we're headed and why we're waking up every day. And I think in that summer, after his mother had passed away, he wasn't sure if I was the one to develop the North Star for the institution. He was looking for his own North Star. And so we were not communicating. Meetings were challenging. I was really trying to figure out what he wanted to see, what success looked like for him. And it was really rocky and messy. That was a word that we described our work as. It was messy. And when I started working with an executive coach with Nancy Dorier, she invited me to think of different ways to communicate with him. And I started writing him letters. and to reframe the relationship as one of partnership in the future of the institution, rather than boss to sort of manager, but really to look at we're in this work together. I'm waking up every day and giving my life to this purpose of art as catalyst for social change. And he was too. And we really did. We had a shared passion for the work. But how we were going to do the work was not completely understood.
Well, so it sounds like you didn't really work on having him change.
I didn't. I worked on having myself change.
So that's interesting right there, because you identified the problem as the demanding boss from the corporate culture. Mm-hmm. And, you're just trying to run a museum and something like that. Right. And then he was making it hard for you somehow. Right. But then you didn't work on having him not make it so hard for you.
Exactly. I stopped trying to fix him, which was a huge waste of my energy. And I started writing him letters about the future.
About the future, not even about, like, you didn't start writing him letters about how you felt and how disempowered you were and that you couldn't deal with it. You did not? I'm not being sarcastic. I mean,
no. I wrote about the future.
Because a lot of people would say that you should express your feelings or you should let him know how you really are doing.
Right.
So you did not do that.
I did not do that. I did write that. I think that was a clearing process that year.
But you just mean you wrote it out for yourself.
I wrote it for myself, right.
Just so you would get it said.
Right. I knew I knew that he would not have a listening ear for that.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. I mean, for people to think that, you don't necessarily have to tell your feelings to someone to have a breakthrough with them.
Right. Because it showed up anyway. It showed up in my leadership that I was moving on from the past. And we never talked about these letters. I wrote him 10 over a year, one a month, more or less, but I would see them in his knapsack. And so I knew that they were reaching him. And we worked, what happened is he let go. He let go of control, of his worry and lack of trust. My worry and lack of trust released as well. And we were both able to be free to take the museum where it needed to go. I almost said university, which is really funny because that's where we went. And I'll tell more about that in a minute.
Well, what else do you want to say about that situation before we get to the university and the change there? So then what did that open up for you if you were able to transform that relationship just by talking about the future?
Right. Talking about the future. And I also stopped acting like a daughter and really more of a partner, that I'm a professional. I really found this mature platform that I didn't know was here, and that he valued deeply my seeing for the future. And so hiring the right staff became critically important, and knowing that the future was beyond the family, that there was something out there waiting for us, which we discovered just 3 years later.
So that's interesting that you identified that you were playing the role of a daughter, which I can also see how it would be logical in some ways, given it was family ownership.
Right. Family ownership, a couple of decades. He's a couple of decades older than I was, and wise and, smart and a teacher. So he always was teaching me something, always is teaching me something. And so I sort of fell into this pleasing role with him. And I think these letters were a breakthrough around that.
So let's talk about that, because, being someone's daughter is not necessarily a negative relationship, right? And it's not for you either. But so what is why is that important to recognize that? Because you were saying you saw you were not a daughter.
Yes.
I
think it was important to recognize because I was saying yes to everything prior to the breakthrough. Okay. I wanted to please him. I wanted to prove him wrong. He had some theories about work, and I wanted to be the best woman director he had ever hired. I wanted to be the best woman employee he had ever hired.
Like impressing a father figure.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Got it. Okay.
But once those were no longer the goals, right? Once I realized it's not about me, it's about the future of this institution. And we got on the same page.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
And so what did that look like? What was the culmination of that breakthrough?
I spent 3 years between 14 and 17 with full coaching for the whole team. So it wasn't just me that had the benefit of Dorier Underwood's mirror to our professional work, but we engaged with the company, with the whole team, and not one person on our team didn't get executive coaching. I mean, we really were able to provide strategic support and buy-in. That was what was most important, was looking at going for impossible, amazing, unbelievable futures.
So it's like you got yourself empowered with your own boss. Mm-hmm. And then as that empowered leader, you could then turn around and work on coaching and empowering your leaders, your staff.
That's right.
Right.
And
to bring out the best in them. Isn't that great?
Yeah, it really was great. And I'm so proud of the work that we've done, because I know that those leaders have taken these skills into a number of companies. And so we were approached. I think this glow showed up in the community, this glow of autonomy and direction and independence and leadership, daring edges. We really claimed our space as a museum that did new things and tried new things. Experimentation was no longer considered wishy-washy. It was considered really interesting work in the world of museum education. And so we were approached by a university to graft onto a new museum project. And we spent the next year bringing all of the tools of Dorier Underwood into a new relationship with the University of Texas at Dallas, and launched a second location. So this little museum that opened in 98 in 20,000 square feet will now have 2 locations, and the new location has 70,000 square feet. So we took it from 20 to 90. And will open in the spring of 2024. Now, it's easy to say, it has been hard to do. And we've had to let go of a lot of the old ways. I've learned a lot about mergers and acquisitions and understanding the new parent company, and really holding on to and protecting the core DNA of what we cared about. And because we worked so hard on aligning mission and putting the work under the mission, I'm still here carrying forward those original values of the founders.
Wow. And so going back a step, before you were part of the university, you said that you established a new way to operate as a museum, more cutting edge, more, creative. Tell me about an example of that. What did you do that was, groundbreaking?
A couple of things. I remember Nancy Dorier saying, if you can say yes, say yes. And so I would ask the staff to bring ideas to the table for educational programming. We offered mindfulness and well-being courses 5 days a week in the museum. We really claimed a space as a thought leader in how art museums are one of the tools of well-being. And this came from being at the base of a skyscraper in downtown Dallas, recognizing that there were 2,700 employees just footsteps away, and noticing stress and anxiety in the elevator, right? Noticing in the parking garage how people were turning corners and taking spaces. And so wondering, what is my role and responsibility in this? If I feel like our collection is this catalyst of Asian art, which is, of course, all mindfulness comes from the roots of Buddhism and Hinduism and Jainism, then why not allow this collection to be the place where human beings try mindfulness on? And rather than sort of shy away and, we'll try this, and if it doesn't work, we won't try it again, we won't keep trying it. What a coach does is really, she pushed us into the space claiming we are the first, wellness museum in the United States. And then it all, the work followed, the reputation followed. So,
and it goes so well with the art objects, because if you can visualize these incredible jade carvings and these incredible suits of samurai armor,
right.
In these dimly lit cases, it invokes and evokes reflection and contemplation. And, you don't stand in front of those things and talk in a loud voice about the news of the day. You go inward and you're experiencing that. And so then contrast that with it's in the basement of a big steel and glass structure in Dallas, Texas. And there's a gap there, isn't there? That calls for bridging.
Yes, and we learned it from our visitors.
Really,
executives would come into the building. I would watch them, and they would do exactly what you just said, they would step into wonder and step into awe with these works of art, and they would sit on the bench for a while. And they told us, "I come here to solve a problem. I get out of my office, I come down here to this museum to solve a problem or work on a tangle." And I was like, this tells me that this is a space of sanctuary and refuge. And if you think about it, Doug, there are very few spaces like that left in the world. Parks, museums, and churches. And of course, we're seeing the decline of church attendance through the pandemic. So let museums be the place where silence is found and exploration.
Yeah. Social distancing was already popular in museums.
Exactly.
You don't want when someone comes up to you and you're standing in front of a painting, you tend to move. Yes. Give them some space, right? You don't stay right there. So that's great. And I also am thinking about how it is just for myself to look at carved stone or those incredible jade things. And it makes me think about how did they do that? Right. And how complicated it is. And then I end up having a thought about my own issue that I wasn't going to have. And it's not exactly linear. It's just thinking, it's getting my brain using all the parts of my brain. We'll put it that way. Right. And
I really believe that Trammell's father, Trammell Sr., knew this. He placed these art objects in the offices, in the buildings in 1964. He was so much ahead of his time around the holistic life, right? If we bring beautiful works of art into the office, my employees will feel cared for and appreciated. And they'll also be challenged by this work ethic that is present in a challenging jade. So he was thinking
say more about the work ethic that's present. What do you mean that?
Yeah, I think when I look at the pieces that Trammell Sr. placed in the offices, and it didn't matter if you were working in the mailroom or if you were in the top executive suite, you had a work of art nearby with a label, with a pedestal. And he chose the ones that likely took the most amount of time. And he wanted his employees to learn this ideal of persistence, right? Really tenacity, taking time painstakingly to, some of these jades were created over 3 generations of jade craftsmen. So the grandfather would start it, the son would continue it, and the grandson would finish it. Wow. And when we think about our speed as employees, we got to get this email out, we've got to sign this contract. We don't slow ourselves down enough to really put our heart and our passion into the work. And so I think that's what Asian art has done for the communities around downtown.
Say a little bit more about Trammell Crow Sr.'s original commitment.
Yeah,
he was bring it back. Yeah.
He was an interesting, self-taught man, born here in Dallas in a fairly impoverished family, a very religious family. So there was rigor, there was structure in the home. Met Margaret, who was from a wealthy Dallas family, a very generous family. And he started working for her company. She had been widowed. So young Margaret had been widowed at age 21. And he started working for the company, and the Doggett Grain Company was where he started. So this idea of storage And then he was partnered up with Mr. Stemmons, and they developed, they wanted to create Dallas as a center for international trade. It was a very big vision for 1940. 40s, just after the war. So they bought up a lot of land together, and they started building the World Trade Center. And they also knew that if you're coming to sell your trades in Dallas, you would need a warehouse. And so that was the beginning of the company. There was also an apparel mart, an info mart, but that led into what happened is they became very good at property management. And so Trammell Crow Company became the largest property management company in the world. And Trammell took all kinds of risks in that work, and, almost declared bankruptcy a couple of times, but didn't, had the relationships. And so alongside all of this business intuitiveness, he was studying Asian art and history and religion, and he modeled his business after the Analects of Confucius. He believed that a knowledge of jade is a knowledge of people. And so there was a lot of very intercultural work in his leadership. He also led with love. And there's a wonderful video of Trammell Sr. speaking to the Harvard MBAs, and he says the single most important factor in a successful business is love. And it's so unexpected because you don't expect this, towering giant of a man who's been so successsul in the corporate world to be brave enough to use the word love. And so I'm always inspired, and I keep, we've talked about this before as consultants in Doria Underwood. We talked about the efficacy of love and the importance of being in this relationship. We spend more time with each other at work than we do with our own families. And so we better love it, right? How sad if we don't. So he's a big inspiration to my own leadership.
It's very exciting. And thank you for that history of him. That's very instructive. Well, let's jump to today and what's happening now, which is in many ways, the antithesis of what Trammell Crow would have wanted, which is burnout at work. There's a culture of people, too many meetings. People want to work a different way, and even now that we've all moved to home and started working from home, now the complaint is we never stop working. That we're still checking our emails at midnight. And so there's that whole idea that there's the great resignation happening and help wanted signs everywhere. And what is your feeling about that in light of what you just said about the possibility of being really engaged at work and really challenging yourself? Almost seems like the good old days. It's like at work, even the idea of going to work. Wow. Wonder what that would be like. Right.
I mean, in some ways, one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been this beautiful 2-year reflective pause. I've heard people say, I felt like I was running on a treadmill. And prior to pandemic, we were seeing the burnout and the fatigue and the anxiety at work. I think now that people have been home and they're coming back, I think they're claiming it with some power, with some power to say, I want a work-life balance. I'm not sure I want to spend 5 nights a week networking. And I'm feeling that way too. And that this time at home is really precious because I think a lot of us fell in love with our homes. I remember early on.
Is that how it is for you? Has that been happening?
I did. I mean, I also love being around people. So I like to come up.
Well, but say the part about falling in love with your home. Say more about
so right at the beginning of the pandemic, a funny thing happened. I was sitting in my house making a list. I'm not sure if you did this, Doug, but I was like, well, that crack needs to be filled and we've got to repaint the kitchen.
Yep.
I had this whole list running and I walked outside and I looked at my house. And it had just rained and it was kind of glistening and beautiful. And I realized, I love this house. This house is beautiful, and I've had a completely different relationship with shelter, right? We were sheltering in place. And so I was thinking about that word shelter. And I was like, I had a completely different space of gratitude for the house. And suddenly the cracks went away and the paint chips went away in my mind. And so I made it a haven. I always loved to make my office a place where I want to be for a few hours each day. And even when I came back to the office here on campus, I did a design of the works of art in the space here, so that I want to be challenged by the space, and I want to be happy here. So what does it take, right? What is it to those listening? What would make your workspace a place where you just can't wait to get to in the morning? And so I think that's important. Environment's important. I think this idea of clarity is really important. And I hope that when I say this, you'll take a note. Creative writing has been one of the most important gifts of my work with Doria Underwood. And it was really critical practice with my coach over the 6 years that I worked with her. For a long time, maybe over 2 years, we met on the phone every morning at 5 a.m. And you don't have to do this when you have an executive coach. We chose to. And we did just some creative writing, hand to pen, pen to paper, for about 45 minutes. And this was a clearing space for me. And those writings were places to purge thoughts and emotions that were not relevant to where I was headed professionally. It was a place to write speeches. A lot of the creativity and some of the skills of my leadership showed up in my speeches because I'd written it. I stopped reading speeches too, because it was all here, sort of in my heart and in my mind.
You had written them, but then when you're having to read it, you could just say it.
I could just say it. Yeah, I'd already been there in a way.
Wow.
So that was a real gift. And I do think writing is a mindful practice.
Well, let's say something more specific. So the writing that you're talking about is free writing. It's not that you have to know it beforehand what to say, right?
Right.
So say a little bit about that for people who haven't heard of that kind of writing.
So it's a creative process and anyone can do it. And you take a piece of paper, you set a timer on your phone. I would start with 3 minutes. It's a very easy, short amount of time. And you just put the pen to the paper. It might help you to find a prompt. We work with prompts where you go to a book and open a page and look for a sentence. And what that does, it's really interesting what it does. Now that you're thinking about writing and you're thinking about this process of 3 minutes, you might already be thinking of what you're going to start with. And that prompt takes you out of that automatic way of thinking. And so the prompt is written. So I wandered lonely as a cloud could be your prompt. And then you set the timer and you just let the hand move with whatever words come into your heart and mind.
So it could be nonsense. It doesn't have to be linear. It doesn't have to make a point.
No. Now, if you want to solve a challenge, that might be a theme of your writing, but you could write la, la, la if you can't think of anything to write, but a thought will come into your mind. We have I don't know how many thousands of thoughts an hour. A thought will come into your mind and that will be your next sort of stream of consciousness. It helps to use the hand rather than type into the computer. There's a different relationship with the part of the brain that is tapped for that kind of writing.
So pen and paper is the first thing. A timed interval. So you're saying 3 minutes is plenty. So anybody can do this, you guys. You can hear it, right? You can just do 3 minutes and you write about anything and then you just stop at the end. You're not going for a certain big finish or anything.
No, just stop and
what is that? What do you look back at them? Do you read them later, or is it mostly about the experience of doing it?
A little bit of both. Okay. So if I might go back and look. I've kept them all because I feel like if I went back and wrote a book about the last 10 years, there would be some really wonderful content there. Okay. I've also thrown some away. It's really up to you. It's your personal writing. And, don't worry about your handwriting. Don't worry about anything, right? This is just a space to express the subconscious mind. The repeated, do you ever do this, Doug, where you have a repeated thought that you can't get out?
Yes.
Repeated. So if you write it, it's gone. It's sort of purged in a way. So
that's great. And so that was part of your practice when you were in the middle of dealing with your dilemma with your organization. And then
that's right.
where you have emerged is to have a series of mindfulness practices. Do you count writing as one of those?
I do. I do. I count writing, and I have a photography practice. One of the things that came through for me is in this evolution and transformation as a leader is that I am a writer. I'm not just a director of an art museum, but I'm a writer. I'm an artist. I now have 2 big art projects going. And so I really think I have sourced this voice, right? And what this voice is supposed to do and be in the world, which I'll declare and say it here as an agent of compassion. That I believe in the power of compassion in action. And I want workplaces to be more compassionate. When we think of solving these problems, right, we've got a lot of, we'll call them problems in the world. How do you go up the river and figure out how to help with suicide rate? How do you help with drug use and all the things we're kind of looking at as citizens of the globe? Well, you've got to influence families. And where are families? They're in corporations. So if you can work with the CEOs, and I love Doria Underwood for this reason. If you can work with CEOs, then you can shift the culture of the planet, literally, because you're going to reach all those thousands of people.
Well, let's talk about that it starts with the family, and you have an idea of having a mindful family, which you've been doing with your own. You have 2 sons and a husband. And so tell us a little bit about that focus. I'm sure it's been clearer than ever for you in these last 2 years. Yeah,
it really has. I'm seeing it. I'll never forget, we did start some mindful practice at the Crow in 2011. So it was kind of always there. Junior is also a very mindful person. And so the boys were 5 or 6 when we started some yoga for youth programs at the Crow with yoginos. And so, mindfulness had always been a practice in our museum just because of the art, and Trammell was a leader in mindfulness as well, but we accelerated that with this work. And so the boys had probably been around mindful practices for about 5 years. Yoginos, yoga for youth, was something we did. And we were at the dinner table, and Baker had been at a baseball game earlier that day on the pitcher's mound. And he said, I was asking him what that experience was like, thinking of the high pressure, right? Of what this was like for a 10-year-old.
Sure, yeah.
And he was like, Mom, it was fine. I just did flower power breath, which is a practice that we've taught 5 years before.
Wow.
And so I love this idea in flower power.
So hold it, wait.
Yeah,
He did flower power breath on the mound?
Okay, on the mound. And the flower power breath is really easy. I can teach it to you in just a couple of seconds. You just take the hand in front of your face and you imagine that it's this beautiful flower. And you inhale slowly as if you're inhaling the scent of that flower, and then you release. Now, he was just doing that with his body, not so much his hands. But I was thinking that is there in his body.
Yes.
As that he learned as a 5-year-old, and now he's doing it as a 10-year-old. And so we have adopted a lot of mindful family practices. And, I did a lot of virtual trainings through the pandemic. And I hear the boys say things that they learned, from listening to me in the house over the last 2 years. And so I do consider us a mindful family. It is hard. It takes constant sort of nurturing of that work. But I do feel like I've offered them a different way of managing anxiety. And that's really what I'm interested in, is what are the positive effects of mindfulness? Well, it's lowered blood pressure, lowered heart rate, increased hormones like serotonin, the things that, make us feel happy. And so I think we're working on some mindful beings at our house.
Well, it's really interesting that it started at work, right? It started at work with your struggle to be effective with your boss. Let's just say it that way. And then it ended up at home with your family, seeing as that's the source of your effectiveness. Right. Is having that grounding at home. And so what about people either who don't have a family or for people who, to your earlier point, really they're at work all the time?
If you take on this mindful life, if you make a commitment to yourself first, so regardless of whether you have a family or at home or a family afar, it really starts with self. And I think that was my journey over the last 8 years, was really working on self-care. Because if you're working all the time, you're burned out and you're not, the famous metaphor is when you're on the plane and the oxygen masks drop, you take it for yourself first. And so to the individual, if you're managing nutrition, if you're managing work-life balance, if you're really sitting with this conscious moment and not the one in the past and not the one in the future, and getting really clear about, I'm here right now, you'll be a better friend and a better colleague and a better employee and a better boss. And so all those relationships will start to feel better. And then I think the second place to go is to work on those relationships and work on compassionate practice at the water cooler. It's one thing, way I like to say it is, how are we really as a staff with each other? This was what a lot of the work we did together over the last 8 years. How are we really? We say we're one way, we say we're a mindful museum, but we've got all this gossip and kind of back talk. So to the individual, it's really in this heart of responsibility where it sits. And then that creates a mindful company, right? And that's when even if you're living alone at home, there's so many ways you can make your home a mindful home. Taking care of plants. Are you going to bed at 9 o'clock? Or what is your relationship with technology? We haven't really talked about that, which is the great competitor of a mindful life, I think. And here we are listening to a podcast together and making one. So it really is making sure that your relationships with technology, with your health are balanced and fruitful. So that's how I would answer that.
So what in a nutshell, what you're saying is, if someone's listening to this podcast at midnight, you need to turn it off and go to bed, okay? Because you're up too late.
That's
and you
right.
need your sleep. You need
That's
your sleep, right? Okay. Well, that's it's wonderful, and there's more that we could talk about, but I just want to thank you, Amy, for joining us on. Well, it's really important what we're talking about, and it's important the work that you're doing. So I hope that we, we'll hear from you again, and I'm sure we will on a future episode of Empowering Leadership.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Doug.
Thank you for listening to Empowering Leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, take a moment to subscribe for free on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a rating and a review so that other leaders like yourself can find us. Sign up for Dorrier Underwood's email newsletter by visiting us at dorrierunderwood.com. Dorrier Underwood serves visionary companies who are serious about realizing their dreams and who are unwilling to settle for incremental results. Our clients are looking for breakthrough results and a deeper sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. To learn more, visit us at dorrierunderwood.com. That's it for now. Go forth and be amazing and take good care of your people. Empowering Leadership is produced by Dorrier Underwood and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.